Hey folks, welcome to another episode of ASP.NET Core from Zero to Overkill. In this episode we'll take a look at a very neat library called ProxyKit that will help us simplify our backend for frontend. So let's start with a quick overview. What we have so far is a stable yet overkill based infrastructure, so very overkill because we don't have the application. The application right now is very basic in terms of features, but we already introduced Docker Compose, identity server, and a lot of other infrastructure stuff that wasn't really needed right now, but as they are interesting topics, it's not waste of work. We would do it anyway. But yeah, we have a stable, I think, yeah, it will change, but we have a nice base to work on right now. But we need to get features into the application that right now simply adds groups and removes groups and edits groups names, so it doesn't do anything. So it's about time we start implementing new features. But the problem that comes to mind right now is the way we implemented the backend for frontend in episode 20, because that will be really a pain to maintain. So if you remember, we created a controller, we called it groups controller, and are simply using the HTTP client to make calls to the backing API, which is the group management service. Regarding that, so far so good. The problem is, if we need to change something in the group management, we will need to change it as well in the backend for frontend. If we a change on the existing endpoints, a new endpoint, removing an endpoint, or adding more stuff. We have groups, but we'll have players, and we'll need to associate the players with the users and all of that. And the same for any other APIs that we want to add in the future. Having the backend for frontend is of course interesting. That's why we created it. So we can, when needed, we can aggregate calls to the services. Instead of having the front end do everything, we can the front end can just make a request, and the backend for front end will aggregate information from different services, adapt, maybe take out something that is not needed, so to simplify the life of the front end. But as we saw so far, for the specific example of the groups service, that's not always the case. Sometimes we just want directly what the service provides us. So in those cases, it's really a waste of time to be implementing these calls by hand. Also, another point was that when we, for the first time, used the BFF, it was also an excuse to play with the HTTP client for us to learn some things about it and use poly and all that stuff. So it made sense to implement it like that in episode 20, but it doesn't make sense in the long run as we continue to evolve the app. With that in mind, we'll introduce ProxyKit, which is a nice little library that allows us to implement basically reverse proxies like we saw with AJ Proxy, but at the level of the web application. So instead of configuring an external container and all of that, the application can configure the proxy as a middleware, like we already have some experience. During this series, we played around with ASP.NET Core middlewares. So it can be a part of the application. It could be just an application that just does that, or in this case, we can mix responsibilities. So we can do an hybrid of everything. So being the BFF, when we need to aggregate requests from different services, we can do that. We can just implement another controller as usual. We can continue doing that logic that we do for authentication and all of that. And also, we can just when a certain endpoint is called, we can just forward it. And instead of using the HTTP client and doing it all by hand, we can use something like ProxyKit. So we'll introduce that for proxying. We'll see that this requires some changes because we were doing everything based on MVC, because we were using the controller to do everything. We had some MVC filters to do things like enforcing authentication and anti-forgery. And also, we'll probably start with this point. We'll take a look at ProxyKit versus Ocelot, which is another option to do something of the sort. We'll see the main differences in a bit. So, before starting, the usual plugs. If the videos are being useful, like, share, leave feedback, being the latest one the more important, but of course the other ones help the channel grow. And for more info regarding the videos, the code and all of that, you can check out the blog where there is a written version of this video. Follow me on Twitter, or just ping me on Twitter if you want to check out other information. And if these two contacts aren't enough, check out my website. I have more contacts in there. And with this in mind, let's get started. So, going back here, we already saw why we need to simplify the BFF, because we want to add new features with as little work as possible, but be open for improvements. So we'll maintain the BFF, but add something that simplifies our forwarding of the requests. But I mentioned here the ProxyKit versus Ocelot. So ProxyKit, the best way to describe is looking at here at the docs. So it's a toolkit to create reverse proxies based on ASP.NET Core middleware. So instead of desk configuration like AJ proxy, we just use middleware and configure. Don't know if there's a sample here. Yeah. So this is the basic part. In dependency injection, we add the required services, and then in the configure of the middlewares, we can just run proxy, forward to places, add stuff. So as usual, I will just do the basics for what we need in this application. The library has a lot more things to offer. And maybe some of you already have heard of Ocelot, which is not really for reverse proxy, but it's for creating API gateways. So API gateway is basically another name for a backend for frontend. Don't know if there is much distinction, but okay, maybe there is. But let's assume it's kind of very, very similar. So the goal of the API gateway is to broker the interaction between the front end and the backend services. So this, at first glance, this is more in line with what we want, and it really is. It adds a lot of features for a lot of stuff: authentication, load balancing, caching. Some of these features, or a lot, don't know, didn't make a very thorough comparison, but this has more features than the ProxyKit because they are for different kinds of tasks. So this is general purpose API gateway, the other is a general purpose proxy. So the other is more forwarding, just forwarding stuff with making some slight changes, while this one can forward, we can create configurations for aggregating the requests instead of doing it in code and all of that. Don't know if I don't prefer to do it in code, but okay, it's a possibility to do with Ocelot. So why am I using ProxyKit even though Ocelot appears to be a better solution? So here in ProxyKit, there is also a part that even compares it, but the main reason is performance. So as ProxyKit is for proxying, it has better performance in these cases where we just want to forward the request. As as it's pointed out here, it's because it's stream based, so it doesn't need to grab all the message, all the data in memory before sending it. It just forwards immediately. Ocelot will cache, not cache is not the correct word, but will buffer the information, so because to be able to do transformations and all of that. So like is even said here, combining the two gives better options, because we could use Ocelot when we want more features and revert back to ProxyKit when we just want to proxy. In this case, right now in our application, we basically just need proxying, because right now we don't need to do anything special with the messages. So for now we're going with ProxyKit, but again, maybe a better decision in terms of having more features would be with Ocelot. But right now I'm going to keep it simple and just proxy the requests. So let's get started doing this. Let's go to the code, or better yet, to the project. Not this one, this one. And we need to include ProxyKit in the solution. So .NET add package ProxyKit. Okay. It's installed. Back to the code. So first thing, we need to add ProxyKit to DI. And this is getting big. Remember in one of the episodes where I started splitting stuff from the startup file? Yeah, I'm not going to waste time now doing that. Maybe in the future, but remember, it's better to have this clean instead of starting to have a giant file with everything here. So services.add proxy. So for now we won't need any special configuration, so just add proxy. And then we need to add it here. So if we remember, let's go here. Let's just copy this and we'll adjust it, of course. So we want to use authentication as usual, use MVC, and what I will do is put it in last. So if there is a request that matches a route from MVC, MVC will handle it. If doesn't match anything, it will fall back to ProxyKit. Now, we will only forward the requests to the groups API, at least for now. So instead of doing this directly, we can branch the middlewares, branch the request pipeline. We already saw this in some episode. We'll use map when is with a predicate, map is with a route, and we'll use API/groups, and then we can and then we move this in here. Use API instead. Now this is very simplified. We need this here. So we'll do here a var forwarded context equals context.forward to, and then I'll just hard code the endpoint for now. We'll see this better in the next. So we'll forward any request that comes to API groups, we'll forward to this. If you remember, this is the alias in Docker Compose. We'll forward, and I'll add copy let's forward headers. Again, I'll just do exactly what we need here. In the next episode, we can take a look. If you need more things, take a look at the docs, because there will be much more features than the ones that I'll show in this episode. So we want to copy X forward. If you remember, this says add, but because we are already behind the reverse proxy, instead of adding the forwarded headers, we want to copy the ones that came from the reverse proxy into the next part. That's the only difference. If we didn't have AJ proxy before, we could use this instead. Now, why couldn't I just return this immediately? Because I need to do one more thing. If you remember, we need to pass the authorization token, the JWT, when we forward. So we need to get the token, forgot this one. So we need to get the token. This is a helper method that just gets the token from the context, as we saw in the past. But in the past, we used the delegating handler that the HTTP client would delegate the request, and it would add automatically the token. In this case, as we are not using HTTP client, we can do it directly here in ProxyKit configurations. But there is also a way in ProxyKit to HTTP client. So you can also configure HTTP client that ProxyKit uses. So we could use that same delegating handler, but it's not needed, because we can just do it in here. So we get the token, and we can forward context, I think it's the name. How do forward context? Okay. Dot upstream request dot set bearer token, and now we simply return await So this is the very basic, and with this we have the forwarding working for the group management API. Just a slight problem, not much of a problem, but the improvement we can make. If in the future we want to add another API, I don't know, live matches, we'll have to do another app map, put it here, so we need to change this every time. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but maybe we can do better. So we can make this more configurable. So what I'll do, I think I already added it here. Let me check. Why is this so big? Yeah, I already created this here. So what we'll try to do is create a dictionary that maps a route to a service, or service endpoint, stuff like that. So in this case, we have the group management API, which will be mapped by groups. And we'll use this dictionary to map everything. So to do this, I'll create a new type here. I am not going to go into much detail about this class, how it's implemented, because while I was preparing the episode, I noticed that this is a very cool topic for the next one in regards to performance and stuff like that. So I'll just put here the code, show you what it does quickly, but in the next episode we'll look at it with more detail. So I already have the code here. Now place the class here. Let me just add stuff. Okay. But quickly, basically we get that what we saw, not here, here. We get this as a dictionary injected into this class. And basically it will map, we'll use a try get, we'll get the path of the request, and we'll output the endpoint that the proxy should forward the request. So it will use the dictionary that came in. I'm using two for performance reasons. Again, show you in the next episode, but basically here manipulating the request path to figure out what's the target endpoint. But we'll see in the next one. If you don't want to wait until the next one, the code is open source, so you can take a look. But we'll see in detail why it's done this way in the next episode. So now here, we'll go here and we'll configure that class dependency injection. I also already have this prepared. Like I said in the last episode, I'm trying to prepare stuff instead of coding everything in the episode to make it faster. Some people would prefer this more like live coding, but I think we need to make the episode smaller, and this one will probably be bigger than I wanted. So let's try to pick up the pace. So configure this, and we are going to the configuration and getting this as a dictionary. Now we can use this. In here, run proxy, for starters, this will now be API. So any request to an API that gets here, if we don't intercept it in the controller, will fall into ProxyKit. Now we want endpoint lookup, and we will context.request services. This is a way to get to dependency injection container. Get required service, and it was proxied. This is a big line. Proxied. So we get the endpoint lookup, and now we'll do if endpoint lookup dot try get context dot request dot path outvar endpoint. So if our lookup class is able to map the path to some endpoint, we'll do stuff. And instead of this will be endpoint. So it will give us the endpoint. If everything works, same. Otherwise, we'll just return a not accepted, not found maybe. Okay, so now we have this more generic. What does Rider want? Complete an... Okay. So now we have this prepared for future routes, instead of just being hard-coded the route to the group management API. Now you probably didn't notice because I passed through it too fast, but for instance over here in configure MVC we add before some options with conventions, filters and all of that to be able to add that filter to force all requests to be authenticated, or also configure the anti-forgery token, validation, all of that. Now, the problem, as you might expect, is that this was very specific to MVC, so it only applied when we were working inside MVC with a controller. Because now we are using middlewares, we can't rely on those MVC attributes because they won't have any effect outside. So we need to do the same things that we were doing, so enforcing authentication and validation of anti-forgery token at the middleware level instead of the MVC level. So to do that, we'll implement some middlewares. We already learned how to do it in episode 8, maybe, not sure. Can take a look. Yes, in episode 8 we learned how to do it, so we'll just do what we already know. We can do, like, if you remember, we can just do use and pass a function here like we did, similar to what's going on in here, but instead we'll really do class-based middlewares to don't add more stuff in here. So I already created here a security folder, and I will create a new class. Let me check, I already have here new class enforce authenticated user, and I'll just copy the implementation over here. It's very simple. So basically we are just, in all requests, we're checking if the user is authenticated. If is not, we challenge. If is, next. It's all that's needed in this middleware. And we can just prepare the other one. Copy the name here. It will also be really simple. We could do everything in the same middleware, but like this we are separating the concerns. And this will be the validate anti-forgery. This is a bit bigger, but not by much. So again, simple middleware, implementing iMiddleware. We, in this case, get the anti-forgery service, and then when it's invoked, we check if we should validate. If we should, we do call validate request with using the service. If not, we just proceed to check if we should validate. This, like I'm mentioning here, I just basically copied from the anti-forgery token for the filter that the filter we were using previously provided by ASP.NET. But basically there are methods, HTTP methods, which are safe, like get, isHead, trace options, which we don't need to validate the token. If we can take a look here. So this is the code for the filter for MVC. Basically does it this way. It's basically the same that I did. I just made some slight tweaks to use these helper methods instead of hard coding the strings. But besides that, nothing special. Okay, so now we can configure these middlewares. So we go to startup. We'll need to add them here. So services.add singleton. What's their names? this one, and we can do immediately the other. Adding to the I, and now we want it to be after the authentication middleware, the one that ensures that the user is authenticated with the data that comes from the request. And we do app.use middleware, and we can just copy this. So after the authentication process is done, we can ensure that we can validate anti-forgery and then MVC. And this is nothing new, we'll do just the same that we had, but instead of using MVC features, we'll use middleware directly. So now I think this should be it. If we go, let me just check if it builds. It does. Where is it? So now if we go here, let me check the line. So let's try to run the application. Forgot to run this once before to cache things to make it faster, but let's hope it's not too bad. At least some things are probably cached from the last time I played with it before recording the video. Come on. Yay. Starting. Okay, let's go to the browser, label localhost, and it's alive. Login. Okay, groups test. Hello. All good, all working as expected. So it's going to the service. Just out of curiosity, we can locker logs. Let's see. Yeah, ProxyKit client stuff. So we can see in the logs the things that's going on. ProxyKit working. Start processing, stuff like that. So all working as before. But we are now prepared for the future, for us to add more and more APIs without having to do everything manually all the time. And we can just take advantage of using this BFF in the cases that we really need to. So let me just check the objectives. Request backing. Move from authentication, anti-forgery, ProxyKit versus Ocelot. Okay, I think that's it for this episode. Again, don't forget that there are more features than the one I went with. I just did the very basic for this case. There are a lot more to do. And of course, I probably don't tell this enough, but remember this is a series, so sometimes I do things the very basic way and in the future will improve. So don't take for granted that what is done in one episode is the best, but it's a way that probably can be refactored and improved more in the future. Hope you enjoyed it and hope to see you in the next one. See yous!